It's okay?
It's okay. It's okay.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Alon. And thank you for everyone who organized and is here today. I'm really glad to be here. I am, as you heard, I direct a program at Harvard Law School that's called our Food Law and Policy Clinic. And what this means is that we're a program really dedicated to teaching law students and future leaders, future political leaders about the food system, about the laws that regulate it. And then students have the chance to work on projects with different partners that are government agencies or nonprofit organizations, in a lot of cases, like just a coalition that's interested in really understanding the laws regulating food and changing those. So we work on projects, some of them are small, like right now we're working on a project with a very small community in the state of Ohio that has suffered a lot of, poor economic opportunity. It's primarily a Black African-American community, and we're helping them understand laws so that they can, try to change them and be able to do more with their local food system, produce more foods, have healthier foods, have more things that are grown locally. So that's like really the small scale. And then on the large scale, we have some work that we do that's more on the global level. And what we're really seeing is that there's so many countries, and I can say from my experience now, spending some time in Israel and the US, we have there are a lot of things that are different, but we have a lot of shared challenges. So a lot of the work now is trying to figure out how can we share across those borders and figure out the best practices. So I wanted to talk today about a particular project we're doing to look at those best practices on food waste and food donation and food security. So I'm going to start with this. This is a picture of a giant field of onions. So this was taken during the COVID pandemic when things all shut down and suddenly, there are onions, they're going to, probably hotels were closed, no one needed them. So this is, one example, and people saw a lot of pictures like this during that time, but things like this are happening, every day. We're around the globe, as you heard, we're wasting so much food. So as you can see, this is a map I like to show, and what it shows is that this is the amount of food lost and food wasted around the globe. The orange circle shows food waste. So that is at the end of the supply chain. That's like consumers in their homes. It's happening at restaurants and at stores and retail. And then the blue is food loss. So that's more like post-harvest. You can see it's bigger in sub-Saharan Africa and in Asia. More food is lost right off of the farm. They have not enough cooling equipment. They put it into trucks. They're driving to market and it gets rotten along the way. But it's, so the solutions are going to be different, but the challenge is really a global challenge that we're wasting more than a third of our food supply. And the World Bank put out a report that predicts with business as usual, we'll go from 1.3 billion tons a year to 2 billion tons a year by 2030 if we don't do anything. So there are a couple of reasons that we care about this. One big one is that it's a big contributor to climate change. So we heard from Alon, of course, the food system and the agriculture system on the whole is a big contributor to climate change. Food waste in particular, just the food that we throw into a landfill, it contributes about 8 to 10% of total greenhouse gas emissions. And a reason that we can focus on this, there's a lot of things we need to do to affect climate and, reduce climate change. But food waste, no one's benefiting from food being thrown away. So there should be good solutions that we can find to, find better uses for that food. So what's the main issue that we're looking at in this project is sort of what I was saying. We're wasting 1.3 billion tons of food each year. At the same time, 820 million people are suffering from hunger. And what's one of the critical solutions is to adopt clear and comprehensive laws and policies that make it easier to donate that food. So there's a lot of things we can do to reduce food that's wasted, but there's a hierarchy that we have, in all the international bodies are using that's really showing the best thing to do is reduce the food that's wasted. The next best thing is make sure that food gets to people, because otherwise we need to spend resources to produce more food and package that food and transport that food to people. The next thing after getting food to people would be getting it to animals and making sure we can produce less feed for animals, which is another, contributor to environmental unsustainability. And then we can use it for, producing energy, but all these other things, I mean, getting food to people is the number one best solution. And there's so many things that make it challenging to do. So we've been really looking into that. And I want to say one other thing. I know there's a lot of words on the slide. I'll tell you the important one, but I think it's really important to keep in mind that this can be seen as part of the right to food. And there was a court case in 2019 that we supported the plaintiffs in this case. It was in the state court of Lahore in Pakistan. And the petitioners in the case said that it was a violation of the right to food to have so much food being wasted. They said it was a violation of the right to food and of Islamic law, but really the court decided on both of those findings. They said it is a violation of the right to food to be wasting all of this food. And not only that, but there's a requirement on government that they find ways to write better laws, to do better awareness raising, and find the ways to make sure that food can get to people. So they require the government agencies to write regulations. And then they said, if those regulations don't work, you're required to go back and fix them and make sure that they work. So it's an interesting way to think about the fact that, all the people who are facing food insecurity, their rights are being violated by not making the best effort that we can to make sure that that food gets to people. And of course, that it's safe. No one should be receiving food that's not safe and not good quality. So this project we've been working on the last few years, we now are working in 24 countries, including Israel. And next week, we're gonna publish actually our Israel findings. So I can talk about them a little bit today, but I'm not gonna reveal everything. But what we've done in each country is really try to document the laws that relate to food waste and food donation, and then write recommendations for that country, share the best practices around the globe so that they can learn from each other, and then make a platform for them to make it easier to learn about what countries are doing. One way we've done that is we've had webinars with government officials from about 35 countries that are joining and learning. And now a number of countries that we've worked with are writing new laws, learning from each other, and seeing what's working in other places. So the way that we've done this has been actually, and again, I mentioned my big role is getting students involved in working on this. So we're not just sitting doing this research in the office. For each country, we have a partner or a client in that country that's a food bank or a network of food banks. Here in Israel, our main partner is Lekhat Israel. And in every country, there's been a partner. And the students have gotten to really work with that client and talk to them, understand their challenges, understand what barriers they're seeing to getting more food donated, understand the questions and concerns that businesses are facing if they want to donate and they don't know the answers. So we talk with NGOs, business, and government in every country. And the first year we took 5 countries. We didn't know what we would study, and we asked them, what are the main issues? And we came up with these 7 issues. So these are the core things we're now looking at in every single country and trying to find the best practices. So the first one is food safety. Is it clear in the laws under the food safety rule that you can donate? And is it clear how to make sure that food is safe? So this is like one of the biggest ones. If in the US, I can, make fun of my own country. Our main food safety agency, they don't really see this as their responsibility. So they don't make it easy for businesses to donate. And therefore businesses say, well, I don't want to get in trouble. I'm not going to do this. Date labeling on food. Often there's a question about what the labels mean. I know in Israel, there's best if used before and used before or used by. In a lot of countries, there's like one label, or in the US, we have no regulation. There are a bunch of labels being used. Nobody knows what they mean, and it's not clear if you can donate. Liability, is there protection for donors if they've, used good faith and then someone got sick? Tax, is there a benefit if you donate? Is there a barrier? Any requirements or penalties? And I'm going to go through a couple of these with a little more detail. Government grants and incentives, funding to help support the infrastructure, and lastly, is there sort of a national plan on food waste? So this is our findings, just so you can see. For every country, we have reports in both English and the native language, and we will for Israel too. And then this is there's an interactive map where you can now find for each of these policies, you can click on it and see which countries have a strong policy, etc. So I wanted to just share a couple of the findings so that you can understand. So I mentioned food safety. Of course, this is really important. And what we actually found in looking at this is a snapshot of our food safety map for the best policies. Only 2 of the countries so far have had a strong policy as far as are the food safety laws really clear about how do we protect people when they receive donated food, and how do we make it easy for businesses to know what can be donated. So let me give you one example that happened in the US a couple years ago. There was some, under US law, there's no food safety rules, but we have a protection for food donors that says if you donate food that meets all of the food safety rules, you can have protection, if someone were to get sick. So there was some meat it was some steak, and the weight of the steak was incorrect on the label. So the steak it said it was 10 ounces, but it was really only 5. So the grocery store realized, they said, we can't sell this because the label's wrong. It would be lying to people. They called the Department of Agriculture and said, can we donate this meat? And the department said, no, because it doesn't meet the food safety rules. You have to throw it away. Well, of course, people who are receiving the donated meat, they're not looking at the weight. They just, it's good, it's safe, it's nutritious. It was, it already caused a lot of environmental inputs to create that meat, and then they had to throw it away. So in the US, this led to they issued a new statement saying if the weight is incorrect on a product, you can still donate it. It was a very narrow statement just about the weight. But I think you can see this issue. If we just say food is to meet all the safety rules and we're not clear with what that means, you can end up with this crazy outcome that doesn't make any sense. So one of the examples here that I wanted to highlight was actually India. And the example here was, this is one of the 2 countries that we found their food safety agency has said, it's our problem if food is being wasted and we need to figure out what to do. So they passed regulations for recovery of food that explains what needs to be done, and they're working to roll them out, but they've really set up a lot of the infrastructure. And it was really important for telling people that donating food is legal, it's allowed, we want it to happen, and we're here to answer your questions if they come up. Another area is liability protection. So the question here, food businesses, when they sell their food, they're following all the rules. They take it to the store, they know the store is going to follow the rules. But they're worried, what if we take it to an NGO that we don't know what they're doing? They're not part of our supply chain. And what if then eventually it gets to a consumer and they get sick? We don't want to be, have to go into court and pay for that if we followed all the rules on our end. So a number of countries have been passing protections. And you can see here some in green, the US, we were the first country, but actually a growing number just in the last 5 years. I think about 6 or 7 new countries have passed legislation, including Israel. So I'm going to give you a spotlight here. And like I said, next week, we're publishing all of our research on Israel, but this law passed in 2018, which gives protection to food donors and the food distribution organizations that pass food along if they all follow the food safety regulations and they weren't negligent. So it doesn't require anyone to do anything. I think that's one challenge. It hasn't necessarily increased the donation, but it's a really good foundation and baseline showing that, government thinks this is important. They recognize there's an inefficiency here and that businesses are unlikely to donate if they think that they're going to get in trouble. And again, the food is required to be safe. They must not have been negligent. So they're still required to follow all the rules. I'm going to give 2 more. So this one, food waste deterrence policies. So this is a growing number of countries are enacting policies that are actually requiring the donation of safe and edible food, or they're fining or penalizing businesses when they throw food away. And I think this is where a number of countries, and in the US at the state level, a number of states are heading in this direction. So you can see here, not a lot of countries have green. The only one is actually Ecuador, which is really exciting. We worked with them on their law that they just passed, and I'm going to show it on the next slide. And then yellow means that there's a law that either is only at the state or regional level, like in the US, or the example in China is there's an anti-food waste law that's really very strict, but it doesn't include a component around donating food. So it's not, it's trying to reduce food from being wasted, but not necessarily getting more food to people. So the two examples here, the Ecuador example I mentioned, they now have a law that is very strict on banning food from going to waste. And requiring if that food is edible, it has to get donated to people. And they actually have in the law very strict fines for the individual that throws food away that should have been, that should have been edible or that was still edible. So they're still working on the regulations for that. And then in the US, this map shows a number of states, a growing number of states in the US that are requiring this. So one example, California now, just starting last year, they started with the largest businesses, and then starting next year, smaller businesses are required to donate all of their edible food. And they're actually requiring reporting from the NGOs that rescue that food to really show that all of the food that could have been rescued from businesses was. And a lot of it for some of these countries, Ecuador was very much focused on food security. They're very concerned about hunger and need. California, they're very focused on climate change. It was part of a big piece of legislation looking at methane. So methane is what's emitted when we throw food away. And it's in the short term, 80 times more impactful than carbon in the atmosphere. So they're thinking, how do we deal with these short-term pollutants? This was one of the best ways, was to stop putting food in the landfill where it's emitting methane. Okay, last one. Actually, I'm going to skip over this. I'm going to give one more, which is National Food Loss and Waste or Food Donation Law. So this is one we just said green or red. Green means that there is some national framework, and red means there's not one right now. But we're actually refining the thinking on this, because what we found is there's some really cool things that countries are doing. And the one that I'm going to spotlight is Australia, which has a really great national food waste strategy. And then they implemented a feasibility study that was a very detailed study modeling exactly what they need to do to reduce food waste by 50% by 2030. So they went through 40 different solutions. They modeled the result, and then they came up with, these are the, I think it was 18 that we need to do. And I mean, this is how they're going to get there. And it includes food donation, which I'm talking about, but it also includes things like upcycling. So taking food products that would have been thrown away and turning them into something else, making sure they get to people. It included a really interesting breakdown of the funding model to get there, which was 1/3 national government, 1/3 state, and 1/3 private companies that would all put in money to, achieve these goals. So I think they're really at the cutting edge here, and a great model. Definitely for the US, we're saying, come on, we got to do what Australia's done. We have in the US a national goal to reduce food waste, but we're not really doing very much to make sure we're achieving that. So we've been bringing these findings to the US and to lots of other countries. The last thing is that we, in addition, now that we've worked with all of these countries, we started putting out policy briefs on each of these types of laws, so that when countries want to adopt one, there's something that they can take right away and look at. Here's what you need to do. Here are the best practices. And some of them we have, like the food safety one, we actually have an outline of what the law should include. So we have a bunch of these, and then we've done these webinars, which I mentioned, mostly are for government from different countries. And one of the challenges is that food is regulated by so many different ministries here in Israel, in the US, everywhere. And so there's not a chance for them to talk to each other. Like in the US, it's our agriculture department that's leading. In India, it's the food safety department. In Israel, it's the environmental minister of the environment. So they don't actually have any chance to meet with each other, because there's no forum for agriculture to meet environment to meet food safety. All right. Alon, can you fix that? I'm going to go back over here and see if I can click. Okay. So my last piece is that, as I mentioned, we are next week launching the report on Israel. So it's going to be, published on the website, which I'll show on the next slide. We're doing a launch event on Tuesday at noon at one of the Lekhet locations. And I spoke to them yesterday, and they said, if people want to join, you're welcome to. You need to email Efrat to RSVP. But also after Tuesday, everything will be, thank you, will be on the website. And it will be actually added onto that map, so you can kind of see for a couple areas. I think what we found for about half of the areas, Israel is going to be a leader, and we can share, you know, great things that Israel's doing. And then for some of them, there's a lot of room for improvement. And I think there's a lot of potential here. I mean, I mentioned, you know, the state of California, that's bigger than Israel, and they're rolling out a national requirement for donation from businesses all over the state. And then if it's not donated, making sure it doesn't go to landfill. So it's led to a lot of really cool innovation in the US too. And so we're now working with a lot of new businesses that have kind of new innovations for turning food into animal feed and things like that too. So that is the end.